Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome into Political Breakfast Live. Give it up for yourselves for getting up and out this morning. Thank you all for coming. Really excited for this morning's conversation. My name's Scotty Crow. I'm the Senior Vice President of Audio here at WABE. Just wanted to welcome you all in and do a couple housekeeping items before we jump in. First thing I want to mention is that in addition to our three co-hosts here, there is a whole team of folks in this room and outside this room who contribute to making Political Breakfast what it is, both on the radio and in your podcast feed. So if y'all could help me just to thank our radio operations team. In the room we have Micah, Rich, Okima, everybody upstairs. Also, Emily and Kevany on our events team have helped put this whole program together, making sure that we have a literal political breakfast, pivoting away from the occasional Atlanta snow day. So thank you, Emily and Kevany, for that. And then, of course, we have our marketing team, Tracy, Sherry, Kristen, everybody else, facilities, Tori, Kenneth. So just want to say thank you. It does take a village, and we're thankful that we can continue to support this show. I want to take a quick minute of personal privilege and ask everyone to do me a favor. If you could please pull out your phones right now very, very quickly. And if you could go to the place that you listen to Political Breakfast, maybe it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could just take 5 or 10 seconds and give a 5-star rating to the podcast, maybe even a quick review. I'm about to hand it off to our team here. And I just want to take a moment and say that I think we all sensed that 2024 was going to be a very big year in politics. But no matter what we were imagining, I think we didn't anticipate how active 2025 would be in its first 6 or 7 weeks. And to start this year, we've had so much news coming out of City Hall across Atlanta. The Georgia State legislative session is happening. It's a critical time there. And of course, out of D.C., there's a touch of news here and there. And so I am so thankful that we have Lisa, Tharon, and Brian to talk to us and have this conversation around local, state, regional, and national politics. And especially right now, it is increasingly rare to have folks from different perspectives, different ideologies come together for civil, open, honest, direct, informed conversation. And so I'm so thankful for Republican strategist Brian Robinson, Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson, and host Lisa Rayam for what they do on Political Breakfast every single week. So with that, if you could please help me in welcoming Political Breakfast Live.
Thank you, Scotty. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Lisa Rayam, and what a joy it has been speaking with some of you in the room, and we are just so delighted to have all of you here. So welcome to this live taping of Political Breakfast here today at our WABE studio. So give yourselves another round of applause this morning. To my right, we have Republican strategist Brian Robinson. Please give him a warm welcome this morning. Thank you. To my left, we have Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Please give him a round of applause. And over here to my far right here is our producer, Lily Oppenheimer. Wave to them, Lily. She plays a critical role in piecing together some of the things that you hear, some of the things we don't want you to hear week to week. And she plays a key role in editing those out for us. So again, welcome. We're going to begin the chat starting in Washington. Echoing what Scotty just said, it has been quite the year already, hasn't it, 2025? And it begins in Washington. How many of you are paying closer attention to the news now that we have a new administration in Washington? Just give us a raise of hands.
And how many of you are viewing less just because of anxiety?
Yeah. There you go.
I forgot to ask that.
I had a neighbor, a liberal neighbor, text me the other day and say, she's a psychiatrist, and she's like, I need to talk to you today. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about politics. And I'm like, I ain't going to help.
Well, President Trump has been in office, 6 weeks, 38 days now. And a lot of his promises are coming into fruition. So no real surprises there. Promises when it comes to federal layoffs, immigration, DEI impact, and even tariffs soon to come. So, Brian, I want to begin with you since our sitting president is a Republican. How is that all filtering here in Georgia with state Republicans? Are they finding it too extreme, or is it just falling in line with what they expected with our president and the promises that he's making and following through on?
You know, Donald Trump is in complete control of the Republican Party right now. And you see that in the comments made by state leaders. Governor Kemp, one of the very few Republicans in the entire country who has stuck his finger in Donald Trump's eye and lived to tell about it in politics, has been willing to stand up and say that Trump is right-sizing government. They can stand to downsize a little bit. You see the insurance commissioner saying that this isn't success, you need to redefine the word. You see the lieutenant governor saying that this is the greatest start to any administration in American history. So do they find it too extreme? No. They're very supportive of what he's doing. And I think right now what you see is the base of the Republican Party strongly behind what President Trump is trying to accomplish. Now, when you look at what happened with Congressman Richard McCormick in his district, that's down in Roswell. The rest of his district kind of goes north into much deeper red areas. But in that part of the district, that's where you're going to have the most concentrated level of Democrats. And in those places, suburban Republicans are going to begin to see some pushback. Those weren't Republicans who were angry with Trump, who, oh my God, I didn't see this coming, right? No, that's not what it was. It was Democrats who were showing up and voicing their displeasure. He would not have gotten that reaction if he was in the Dawson County part of his district. That would not have happened. But you're also seeing Republicans brand on the state level using some of Trump language. You know, Burt Jones had a regulatory rollback bill. Now they've rebranded it as a DOGE bill, kind of going over the Elon Musk branding. And you see Speaker Burns going to the White House for the girls' sports executive order. You see him and Burt Jones going up there for the Laken Riley Act signing. And you saw state Republicans, when they did the Laken Riley Act signing in D.C., reminding everybody that they, on the state level, the Republicans here, passed a similar bill in Georgia last year. So you're seeing Republicans in the state try to align themselves with what Trump is doing. You know, last week, the Attorney General, Chris Carr, who also is somebody who had to stick his finger in the eye of Trump at some juncture, was outside of the Department of Justice talking about meeting with Attorney General Pam Bondi about trying to get the lawsuit against SB 202, our election bill, dropped, talking about human trafficking enforcement, gang enforcement. So even no matter where you are in the party, you're aligning yourself with Trump right now.
What we're seeing is a more united Republican Party than we were a year ago. That, you know, we were talking about this fractured Republican Party
because the never Trumpers have left. Right? They're now Democrats or independents, and that's part of what's happening.
That's part of the reason. Tharon, let's bring you in on the conversation. What is the reaction of Democrats at this point? Because you said a couple of weeks on the podcast, there's no real surprises of what Trump's doing, but the impact is almost surreal, especially when it comes to the layoffs at the CDC and on the federal level. These are real people who are being impacted here.
Well, the first thing I had to sort of remind myself and remind my friends, I had that friend too, Brian, who called me and she was like, I cannot turn on the television because I am so outraged. But she reminded me, Lisa, that we had a now president, but then candidate who totally disowned Project 2025. And he met with some of the folks that maybe have been involved in it, but he never endorsed it. And if you just, go to your dual screen and just put up Project 2025 and look at what he's done the last 38 days, there's some striking similarities there. There's some parallels. I mean, Brian is kind of snickering because, it is true. And so what Democrats have tried to do in Washington is keep their constituents calm and let them know, hey, we're going to try to deliver for you. But it's very hard to do that, Lisa, when you have a president who comes in on day one and introduces the amount of executive orders that he did. And you heard me also say on the podcast, it's just the Constitution. I mean, we all in here have read the Constitution. We've taken the constitutional class. Congress controls the purse strings. Now, there's an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a congressional branch. And so with these executive orders, it's putting a tremendous amount of pressure on Republicans and Democrats to go back to their districts and to have the conversations like Congressman Rich McCormick did. I would say that not everybody in that audience here in Georgia and Roswell that pushed back on a congressman were Democrats. I am hearing from Republicans who are saying, I voted for this guy once or twice, and I work at the CDC, and I never knew that he was just going to come in and eliminate my job. So what happens now is that's a trickle-down effect. That woman or man has to worry about her job, but now the families that are being impacted. And to me, Michael Thurman said it best, former state labor commissioner, former DeKalb CEO. We're all for merit-based, metrics-driven layoffs. Like if you got too many people working for you and you don't have enough work, That's just simple math. All right. I maybe don't need to have these people. But if the work is there and the folks are adapting to a virtual learning style, which the federal government told us to do, and we are seeing strides in these departments, then why just go in and just fire folks because you just want to fire people who are federal workers? And so what Thurman said was that there's eliminating or right-sizing bureaucracy, but there's also showing a compassion and care about people. And guys, we're here in Atlanta, we're in Georgia, we got tens of thousands of folks right now who do not have a job and have been federal workers for a very long time. I'm a former federal worker. Brian is a former federal worker, right? So this whole notion that everyone who's a federal employee is just lazy and don't come to work, you see these videos surfacing of empty desks and empty pods. Well, that happens when a presidential administration comes in. Most of these folks who work for the president are presidential appointees. So he or she knows that their job is up, so they transition out. But what we got to do as Democrats, Lisa, is not panic. And I know it's 38 days, and I'm still saying not panic, because that's one of the things that got us in trouble in the first place. When we were here at this Political Breakfast Live podcast, I was doing everything I could to try to tell people what was at stake. I told people sitting here in this very seat that if you elect President Trump as the next president of the United States, he was going to cut these programs. He was going to have this very divisive style of politics. And, we just kind of laid it out. What we didn't know, Lisa, is that he was going to move this fast. And what's the difference is that Republicans are telling me Trump back in 2016 was just, it was ad hoc. It was just, it was my Mike Vick strategy. Mike Vick used to get in the huddle when he's the Atlanta Falcons, and he would just call a play in the huddle. He would take the ball and look one read. If it's not there, he would just take off and run with it and score a touchdown. Well, that's kind of what Trump did in his first term. But in this term, he surrounded himself with very strategic people who had 2 months to transition the government and was very laser-like focused on what they wanted to do. I am proud of our membership in Washington, particularly Hakeem Jeffries, and our local delegation here. They are trying, Lisa, to cut through the noise. They're showing compassion for the people. They're telling these workers that, look, you can go and apply for unemployment benefits. There are some federal programs out there that you can do. But mark my word, I think that a lot of these folks who are being laid off, some of whom voted for Donald Trump, some of whom voted for Kamala Harris, are going to be in play in 2 years. And I think that the Democrats have got to make the argument is this gentleman told you he was going to do all these things that he have. And the last thing I'll say is this, Lisa. His top two issues, and Brian, he drove it home for a year and a half, and I got to give him credit. It was illegal immigration and inflation. Well, guess what? Inflation is still high. All right, this man been in office in 38 days. His words, not mine. He said, I would lower inflation on day one. And I know we can talk about tariffs and what's going on, but I just think that what's happening with this administration, they're not prioritizing what matters most to the American people, and that is making sure that we have enough money in our pockets. We can actually have a job so we can take care of our families and send our kids to school and have them return safely. And if we have an elderly parent like I do who requires support from Medicare and Medicaid, and she shouldn't be demonized for getting help for what she's earned, those senior citizens have got to be protected as well.
Mm-hmm. Immigration and inflation, two other points we'll talk about in a moment. But back to those government workers. Many marched to the Gold Dome recently and demanded from our state leadership, help us. We need your help. Knocking at the door of Governor Kemp. Governor Kemp, saying, right-sizing may not be so bad after all. So what happens next, Brian, when you're knocking at the governor's door asking for help and he may not be listening?
Well, when it comes to federal workers, they have been a protected class for a long time. And I am not going to diminish their work. I'm not going to say they're all lazy, they don't show up. I'm not saying any of that. But they have been a protected class in a way that most people in the private sector are not. You see 1.5 million Americans a month in the private sector laid off. So people in the private sector have a appreciation and a fear all the time of the job churn. It is part of daily life for most of us. And today we see Americans having 4 and 5 jobs before they even get into their 30s. The churn is very normal, and federal government workers have been somewhat shielded from that. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot of sympathy across the board with Americans in the private sector for federal workers who've had this protected status. Now, that said, most federal workers are also highly educated folks. They are and high demand in the private sector, most are going to land in their feet. If you are somebody who can get a job at the CDC, you have a degree, you have an expertise that is high demand, and you're going to be able to perhaps even make more money. Not everybody. Some folks are going to take some time. But we still have a 3% unemployment rate in this state. There's still a lot of job openings out there. I think most of them are going to be fine. When it comes to how they're let off, I do have a problem, to echo some of what Tharon said, with people who are being fired just simply because they're on the probationary period and being told you didn't meet expectations. That's an HR issue that I have a real problem with, because they aren't backing that up with any evidence that these folks weren't doing their jobs. That should be done better. And I'll say Congressman Rich McCormick said that in his comments in the town hall. And I heard him on national news last night saying, I'm all for downsizing. I want it to be done a little slower, a little more methodical, with a little bit more of a strategy. The problem that we have is Trump understands, to Tharon's point, he is miles ahead of where he was in 2017 as far as understanding how all this works. And he had people around him in 2017 who were stopping him, and he made sure this time he has fellow travelers surrounding him who have the same idea and the same agenda. They want to get as much cut and as much done before the opposition can solidify and get on their feet. And we're beginning to see that happen. We're beginning to see that in these town halls, right? You're beginning to see the opposition form. I thought the Democrats were like, with their fainting on the couches in the first days about, why aren't our leaders doing anything? I don't think that was fair to Democratic leaders. It takes time to figure out what's going on. It takes time to have a strategy. And look, they don't have any of the levers of power in Washington. Republican voters don't understand that when Republicans don't have total control, and Democrat voters don't understand that when they're like, why don't you do something? And you want to know why Donald Trump has the support of Republicans, even though there are all these arguments about separation of powers and the unitary executive and what the constitutional boundaries should and shouldn't be, is because our system was broken. And we can all agree, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we weren't passing legislation anymore. We weren't doing the people's business. 2 years ago, the Congress passed 20-something bills. The do-nothing Congress that Truman complained about passed 900 and something. That gives you an idea of how broken our system is. And so he's like, all right, I'm just going to ride a roughshod over all this and just do it. And so the ball is moving, and I think we need some congressional reform. I have a real problem with the unitary executive authority. I had a real problem with when Biden wiped out $400 billion in college student loans. He had no authority to do that. He was struck down in the courts, and then he was like, I'm going to do it anyway. You can't turn around and go, well, Trump's ignoring the courts. Biden kind of set a precedent with that himself. So this is something that's bipartisan. There's a bipartisan overreach in the White House, and there is a bipartisan giving up of authority on the congressional level, and that's got to get fixed.
No matter what side of the aisle you're on, politics carries, a level of anxiety anyway, right? So factor in, Tharon, Elon Musk for us.
I'm not going to say what Jasmine Crockett said, but even though, I hosted her down here, Brian was like, who's this woman coming to Atlanta talking all this about Trump? But no, but go ahead. I'm sorry with your question.
Yeah, factor in someone going on social media saying, tell us what you do, at work, or else, you resign,
3 quick things that Brian said. I think that we got to remember the reason why nothing got done in Congress is because you have Republicans in leadership who were governing. All right. So you can make this argument that this president is coming in and doing executive orders, but by doing that, he's created a constitutional crisis. All right. And so, yes, I agree with Brian. Congress should do more, but they had 2 speakers, one of whom they ran out, Kevin McCarthy, and they replaced him with Mike Johnson. So that falls at the feet of the Republicans. Also, I was talking to this gentleman earlier today, is that the strategy in the past had been, Lisa, the courts are going to decide. The courts, the legal process will interfere. The problem now is that I don't think we can wait for the courts to intervene, for the legal process to intervene. And the most disheartening thing to me that I had a conversation with a woman and a man who are veterans. One served in the Navy, one served in the Army, who was at the Capitol, who just got laid off. And their veteran affairs person was just laid off. And I don't care who you are. Our veterans deserve to have a person that they can call or email or text that can help them get the benefits that we made. And so when you start seeing President Trump cut VA officers and federal workers, but now he's at the Pentagon, I mean, we should be afraid that a lot of people who are there to protect us are being fired. And he just fired the Joint Chiefs of Staff, brother, because he said it was DEI. But back to your point about Elon Musk. I predicted on the podcast this bromance is going to last about another 10 months, right? By this time next year, this bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump is going to end. And it's going to end because egos are going to prevail, right? I'm one of whom that I can probably work for another strong alpha male because I'm an alpha male myself, but I am coachable and I can definitely, make sure that my leader, whoever I'm working for, Phil, you know this because you and I have known each other a long time, make sure that, if it's John Lewis or it's Barack Obama or Kasim Reed or Michael Thurman, these folks are going to get elected. The difference is that I was never a billionaire who had more money than the person that I was actually advising standing next to with my son, who clearly has heard some things at home that he repeated on national TV, right? I have a 4.5-year-old son. I have to be very careful what I say around him because he will repeat it. But what they're banking on, Lisa, is that I think this demonization of the federal workers, the demonization that these folks are lazy, that they don't work, that they're not needed, it's just, to me, creating a huge void. And this executive order strategy, you got to call it what it is. It's a constitutional crisis. And the last thing I want to remind people, Elon Musk, just a year and a half ago, people were talking about him like, he bought Twitter, he didn't buy it, he turned it to X. Tesla sales were down. I mean, you're talking about somebody who's being revamped on the backs of Donald Trump. So it almost makes me believe that him and Trump had a deal that if I become president, I'm going to give you a certain amount of time to insert yourself with your strategy and all the young people around him. Nothing wrong with young people getting jobs and doing good things, but you got to have some experienced people in these roles. And so the compassion from the president, I will say this. You look at him. I mean, he greeted a group of tour people. I think this is bothering him. I'm telling you, I think it is really, I know he's given the green light, but Elon is just out of control. And we better pay very close attention to what Marco Rubio is doing, traveling all across the country, all around the world, creating these deals, tariffs, shaking down these folks, telling them that they better do this or the United States is not going to support this. Oh, and by the way, the other thing he said, he was going to end the war in Ukraine. Well, last time I checked, the war in Ukraine is still going on with Russia. And we got to also talk about, the things that this president is not doing. He's not doing press conferences. He's not addressing the economy. And I think Brian is shaking his head because, honestly, the American people are going to let him get away with it for so long. But I think that by the end of the year, if we don't see inflation under control, if he doesn't have a clear, comprehensive strategy of what's happening at the border, and if he does not show who are you going to replace those federal workers with that you've asked to basically walk the plank and say, hey, what are the 5 things you've done this week? And some of them refused to do it. Some of them were told to report to their supervisors. I think then the American people will be like, okay, you know what? We need to pay very close attention to what's going on. We don't know if this strategy is working.
I was shaking my head not about the economy thing. I think he needs to be talking about the economy more. The one thing we've heard him say is there'll be temporary pain, right? That's the one thing that we've said. He's talked about immigration a lot. So we got half of the pie there, but now the other half, and frankly, the other half at this juncture is going to be the more important. We had 3% inflation over the last quarter. That's something that's going to be a big deal. I've heard Trump this week talking about what I was just agreeing with you is he holds news conferences all the time. I mean,
in the news conference there, he's not talking about anything.
He's sitting there at the desk taking questions. You got Elon back here in his black "Make America Great" hat, and standing off to the side. He is very accessible, and there's a stark contrast. And I think this is on purpose with how hard it was to get hold of Biden by the media. He did not do media avails. He was not available to them. And
towards the end, he was available in the beginning. Yeah, in the beginning, he was available.
Yeah, we all know why, right? Because he couldn't do it, and so Trump wants to be out there answering questions to continue that contrast with what we had with President Biden. But he's talking now about taking the savings from these layoffs that we've had and cutting a check and extending it to all Americans. I would say that's inflationary, right? I mean, that's going to cause an inflationary issue. If we lower interest rates, that's going to be inflationary. Tariffs are going to be inflationary.
So has he thought all this through?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. If you listen to Political Breakfast, he would know because I talk about this a lot. I talk about this a lot.
We got to get him to download the app. Yeah.
But Brian hit on something too, and I want to make sure. I know we have a lot of people in the room who are all local. We also can't ignore the fact, Lisa, that as we sit here on this beautiful day in Atlanta, it's going to be sunny today. Traffic is heavy, but not too bad. You can get here on time. But we literally have people right now scared to go to the grocery store, scared to take their kids to schools, scared to go to church, and scared to go anywhere because they're afraid that they will actually be detained because of their last name or how they look or get arrested. And that's, y'all, that's going on right now. So commending these local officials like the mayor of Brookhaven, John Park, and also the mayor of Atlanta, Andre Dickens, and people like in Decatur, and a lot of places where these immigrants live, they pay money to the system, they work, they pay taxes, and they send their kids to school, they send their kids to church. But right now, there is a level of being afraid. And it's not just Hispanic and Latino people who are being detained. There are people from other continents who are just randomly being detained and without any reason at all other than they're here and because of their last name and the way they look.
With that said, Governor Kemp, who's been on this long honeymoon, his entire regime, it seems, his relationship with President Trump has changed recently. They seem more on the same accord as of late, and it's troubling to some. And Brian, I don't know, can you explain what's happening here and why this is possibly happening? Politics is at the root of it, I'm sure. But a lot of people are scratching their heads over it right now.
Hey, self-interest properly understood explains so much in politics. Brian Kemp is still in his 50s. He's got approval ratings around the 60s in a very politically divided state. That's super impressive. You don't get to those numbers without a lot of Democrats and independents, racially diverse voters saying, I approve of the job this guy is doing. He's in a really strong position. If you're looking at running for the White House in future years, there are things that Brian Kemp has taken into consideration. There is no lane outside of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. There is no anti-Trump faction or anti-Trump Republican Party that you can run in and be a nominee for president of the United States. You cannot post up on him and be relevant and continue. You just can't, and he gets that, right? He posted up on Trump when he had to. When we had that crisis, he stood up and said no, and he survived. And again, self-interest probably stood on Trump's side. He tried to beat Kemp. He did everything he could, funded a primary challenger, got beat horribly. And Trump's like, all right, I gave it the good college try. I'm done. I'm not going to beat Brian Kemp. I'm going to play nice. I'm going to act like we're friends. Both of them are being very pragmatic about the relationship. Right now, Kemp is the chairman of the Republican Governors Association. This is a very significant position. He will be around the country this year raising money for Republicans running for governor in 2026. So he is building a huge national network. RGA met last week in D.C., so they went and met with the president in the White House. Obviously, Kemp as chairman is the one interacting with Trump the most. So we saw Kemp for the first time. Really, it had been really chilly from 2021 on. And last year, Kemp, who has a significant political operation in the state, used those resources with millions of dollars to turn out Republican voters in the effort to get Trump elected here. And it worked, 120,000 vote margin thereabouts, fourth smallest in the country, but still significant compared to 12,000 votes 4 years before in the other direction. So Kemp is doing what he needs to do to be relevant in the party, to be a leader in the party. But one thing that's worth watching for Georgians and for Americans who see Brian Kemp as a future candidate, he's still his own man. He's still his own brand, and that is a trick. Right?
His messaging hasn't changed.
No, it's the same. He's his own guy, his own brand, and it's really hard to do in the Trump era of the Republican Party, where everyone wants to glom on to Trump's brand, which honestly Kemp did in 2018 when he ran for governor the first time, and then was sort of forced to have his own brand by the crisis of 2020. So he's in a really unique position. My question, if he wants to run for president, is there a lane for him? He's very talented. He is, again, very well networked, will be able to raise a lot of money. Is there a lane for him with J.D. Vance there kind of in the waiting, with Don Jr. there in the waiting? You know, for those listening at home, there were some groans in the audience. Yeah.
I saw you.
That's got to be part of his calculation. And so he doesn't want to run for U.S. Senate in 2026. Polling shows he can beat John Ossoff. That would keep him in the game, even though he doesn't want the job. So he's got to make that calculation. Can I stay relevant in 27 and 28 going into that election cycle? Do I have a chance against a J.D. Vance or Trump world candidate?
That relationship between Trump and Kemp drives this one nuts. How are Democrats responding to this newfound relationship between Kemp and President Trump?
I think B-Rob just did a really good job of sort of talking about that trajectory, that sort of history of their relationship. I think the one thing he left out is that it was a good relationship until the now president, but then candidate came to Georgia and disrespected First Lady Marty Kemp and the girls. And that's when I think Governor Kemp, you saw, take to social media right away and push back. And so then since then, they've made up. Look, Governor Kemp has got so many things he's got to get done this legislative session. I truly believe, knowing him for a very long time, if you look at him and you hear what he's saying, he's focusing on the probably 4 to 5 major priorities that he has going on right now in the session. However, he's being thrust into the federal conversation because of his role at RGA, and he is traveling across the world and continuing to make Georgia the number one place to do business. So, he was just, in Germany when he made the comment about the right sizing. And this is a man who, I do believe he made the comment saying there's nothing wrong with a little bit of right sizing. And that was sort of a little bit of red meat to the right. But this is also a man, Lisa, who we've talked about on this podcast, who's given raises to teachers, who's increased state salaries to folks over time, incrementally. He's also raised money to make sure that, he's also been very conservative with the $13 billion that he's got sitting in the federal government. So for him to go on the world stage and say there's nothing wrong with a little bit of right sizing in his home state when people are being laid off, I think he meant what he said, obviously, but he also is a man who, if you look at his record, has actually been able to be supportive of government when it works. And he campaigned on strengthening state government and actually giving people raises. The other thing that's really going on is that there will be another time where the governor will disagree with Donald Trump. It's coming, because I think it's going to either come when, we got to remind people, he went to Washington, D.C., the governor did.
I didn't think they'd ever make up.
Well, here we go. He went to Washington, D.C., asked for the extension for the Hurricane Helene, right? I'm not making this up, B-Rob. And Trump said no. Brian Kemp, if he was not ambitious in the future, would have come back home and said, hey, Georgians, I went and asked for this relief, but this president denied it to you. Instead, he said, okay, well, I didn't get it, so I'm just going to try to find the money elsewhere. And I just don't know how long that's going to last, because Governor Kemp loves Georgia. He loves being able to deliver for Georgia, and that's his job. So there will be another moment where President Trump will tell him no to something specific about Georgia. And I think that's where you'll see the governor step up. And I've said this before, they have this sort of political abusive relationship. They fight, they make up, they fight, they make up, and now they made up again. And I hope that they don't fight at the expense of the people of Georgia. But the governor, look, Brian is more in the Republican circles than I am on a daily basis, but I always talk to a lot of people who are very close to him. He's laser-like focused, because if he has a bad session, if he does not get all of his top priorities done, then this conversation next year is going to be totally different, because next year in 2026, we will be entering into a gubernatorial race. Candidates will have filed, and people will start talking about what's not happening at the state. So Governor Kemp and his team does not want him to go into next year by not being able to turn to a list of things that he has been able to prioritize and do in this legislative session.
Well, this is a governor with a really high approval rating, and it's been very steady. Questions?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. My name is Ralph. So my concern is that I think all of us should be concerned. They want to cut the CDC. They want to cut the NIH. They want to get out of the World Health Organization. They want to strip a USAID. So we have all these viruses, we have these bugs in different countries, and they're going to come over here. They're as close as an airplane ride. USAID provided for vaccines for Ebola, Mpox, you name it. So what's the point in, it seems to me more pragmatic, let's kill the bugs at the source as opposed to letting them spread over here. Look what's going on in Texas. We have a measles outbreak. So this is not helping us by cutting these workers over here to prevent these diseases that are going to affect a lot of us. Vaccination rates have been going down because people aren't buying into the system. You know, I'm afraid of these vaccines. Here we have a guy, RFK Jr., he's not a vaccine guy. He shouldn't even be in that position.
So I'll respond quickly. It's called Center for Disease Control for a reason. You want to be as proactive as you can to do exactly what you just explained. If you know that there are deadly diseases and there's anything that's coming to this country, you want to be proactive. But then if it's here or it's already sort of in our systems or we're living with it, then that's where this CDC and these women and men, many of whom have decades of experience in a particular field, are literally being laid off. And so I totally agree with you. And I think that there's not enough outrage. What happened, though, is that I think that when the pandemic happened, the CDC had a PR sort of hit. There was all this back and forth in the media, whether or not they were actually doing what they said they were going to do. They were changing course, which is nothing wrong with that, right? I believe that if you know that you've done something wrong, say it immediately and fix it. But ultimately, since the deadly pandemic, which, by the way, you all, was only just a few years ago, people right now have COVID in Atlanta. I know 2 people who have it. Matter of fact, I'm not trying to scare you all, but you may be sitting next to somebody who either just got over it or they just don't have these symptoms. And we just say, you know what, we're going to live with it, right? I mean, we learning to live with COVID. But to your point, the CDC is an organization that's here in DeKalb County that has been so profound in its efforts to make sure that they combat these deadly diseases. And these women and men are being treated badly, kind of what B-Rob said, because they're just one of the organizations that this administration has decided to attack. And I'm just worried that I don't think these folks are going to be able to find jobs right away. I mean, I don't know about you all, but a lot of employers now are hiring people who are overqualified because it's hard to find good people in the workforce. So if you're somebody coming out with years of experience and there's someone younger who is just as educated but not as much experience but cheaper, they're going to hire that younger person, right? And so I'm very concerned about it. I share your concerns, and I think that these CDC workers deserve to be treated fairly. Every single leader should be making sure that they have the resources they need to go through this transition they're going through.
Yeah, I read an article yesterday. It was very sobering that a CDC worker was considering food stamps and unemployment, and, it's just, really shock to the system. Question?
Elena Sanders. My question is to Brian, and you kind of said what I'm actually going to state, and I don't want to misquote you. You said there's still a lot of job openings, they will be fine. So someone who is a master degreed or a federal worker who is at the top of their game, and I would love to know those jobs you said that they're still out there. How are they going to be able to make the same amount of money they used to make? How are they going to be able to get those jobs that you're stating? As the gentleman just stated here, they may not get a job because they may be overqualified and they can't get the same income they used to have. So you're talking about someone who has a family, maybe of 3 or so, and used to that income and have a mortgage, and they probably won't be able to get that same amount. So now we're increasing the population of homelessness because they may not get the funding that they used to have in those jobs. So I would love to know those jobs that you stated there are a lot of job openings and they'll be fine. Can you tell me what those job openings are?
Thank you, Elena. If I'm out in the job market, being somebody who has a master's degree in a healthcare related field, health research field, that's a good place to be compared to where the average American is if they're out in the job market. So, and I'm not saying that I don't have compassion for people who've lost their jobs. I don't think that folks are that homelessness is the next step when you're laid off. Again, we have layoffs in this country every month in the private sector. 1.5 million is the average across the country. So if you look at the average American voter, there's not like a huge amount of sympathy for workers that are treated differently than they are as far as job protections go. And again, I'm not diminishing the pain of job losses, but where I would disagree with Tharon on this a little bit is this isn't so much very experienced people. The main cuts of CDC were the probationary period workers, which are your younger workers, so your next generation of workers. And that's my concern with the strategy there. We're letting go of people who are the ones we're going to need in 20 years, the ones we need to have that first foot in the door. So I would have done that a little bit differently. I don't know what the right size for federal government is. I agree that it's probably too big. I agree that we need to cut. We have a $37 trillion debt. And let me tell you, there is nothing we can do that's going to be a serious reform that's going to get our country on the right track that doesn't cause pain. We cannot have a system that pays people Social Security and Medicare for a third of their lives. People did not live to 65 on average when we implemented Social Security. Now we live close to around 80. It's unaffordable in the long run, and it's going to cause pain for some people when we do the reforms or when the system just goes bankrupt, which is set to do in the early 2030s, because we're not going to do anything. We're not going to take these hard choices. There's going to be pain. There's going to be more pain.
I'm Phil. We finally found out what trickle down is, trickling down and losing jobs. The other thing is, you want to run it as a business, but nobody wants to increase revenue. That just doesn't make any sense. You can't cut your way to a budget. And the bottom line is today or last night, Trump said for $5 million you can get a gold card to earn citizenship. Why don't you talk about that one?
Well, that sounds like a revenue source to me. What you just said, didn't, other countries do that, and so it is something that's not original to him. We see it. It's often done in tax havens, which obviously we wouldn't be considered that. If you listen to what Trump says, though, where he does talk about revenue. He wants to have this office of external revenue where they collect tariffs. And he's talking about how all this money is coming in and Congress is going to be like, oh, no, stop. It's just too much money. It's too much money. We can't spend all the money. So he is talking about revenue. I'm an old free market Republican. I'm okay with tariffs if someone is acting unfairly, if our manufacturers are at a competitive disadvantage. I'm not okay with arbitrary ones because they're inflationary and they're taxes on Americans. So all that to say, I disagree that he's not talking about revenue because he is. Whether you agree with him or not, right?
As you all probably know, I'm a registered lobbyist. B-Rob is down at the Capitol. He's not a registered lobbyist, but he has clients. He doesn't lobby legislators. I don't think so.
I do not.
But no, he doesn't. But Phil is there almost every morning that I'm there greeting people. Just quick shout out to him.
Oh, yeah, you stopped me outside. But yes, right, I remember that now. Yeah.
And he's missing today for Political Breakfast. So, all right, thank you so much for joining us for this live taping here at WABE. What a pleasure. We appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for having breakfast with us this morning. We appreciate you.